Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mormon Newscast. It is Monday, May the 20th. I'm Rebecca Biblioteca. It is raining and sleeting and windy where I am. I hope the rest of you have better weather as you watch our broadcast. We are joined today, of course, by the men of the hour. We have Radio Free Mormon. How are you?
Just fine. Thank you, Rebecca.
Great. How's the weather where you are?
Absolutely gorgeous, as it should be on the 20th day of May.
I'm in Utah. I'm sorry. I have no explanation except for the weather is cursed here. And Bill Reel, how are you today? And how's the weather? You're also in Utah.
Life is good. I'm in southern Utah, which is the desert, and it's kind of cool now because it looks like it's going to rain outside, but it was like 85 degrees today.
Gosh, I really live in the wrong place. Well, regardless of the weather, we're really excited to bring you all the news in the Mormon world today. Let's go to our first slide and we'll recap the stories that we're going to cover, and then we will dive right in. Okay, we are going to be talking about Mormon Seminary. Is it detrimental to teens? That is a big question, and I bet a lot of you have strong opinions on that like I do. We're also going to be talking about temples, tisk, LDS women, and one-sided sealing policies. And as our thumbnail represented, the priesthood ban, members versus leaders. And I believe that's Bill's story. And I believe that's first, if I have the order correct.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Good evening. Tonight, we note a significant shift in perspective within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons, regarding a historically contentious issue: the priesthood and temple ban that once prohibited Black members from full participation. Recent surveys indicate that 36% of Latter-day Saints now believe that the ban was uninspired and primarily a product of racism. This growing consensus contrasts sharply with earlier church teachings and public statements. The change in perception among Latter-day Saints highlights an evolving understanding of a policy that has long been a source of pain and controversy. For over a century, Black men were denied the priesthood, and Black women and men were barred from temple ordinances, a policy that was lifted in 1978. Historically, church leaders offered various explanations for the ban, including discredited theories about premortal valiancy and the curse of Cain. And it wasn't until 2013 when the church, for the very first time, stated that past doctrines around the ban had been disavowed as racist theories that were false. However, some church authorities maintain that the ban itself, despite its deeply problematic rationales, was divinely instituted. Elder Dallin H. Oaks, a member of the First Presidency, has stated,
I observed the pain and frustration experienced by those who suffered these restrictions and those who criticized the restrictions and sought for reasons. I studied the reasons then being given and could not feel confirmation of the truth of any of them. As part of my prayerful study, I learned that in general, the Lord rarely gives reasons for the commandments and directions he gives to his servants.
This is the official voice of the church, still defending and supporting the ban itself as having been a directive from God, regardless of the flawed human explanations that accompanied it. Elder Oaks' position underscores the delicate balance within the church's leadership. While disavowing the racist justifications once offered for the ban, some leaders still uphold the notion that it was a divinely mandated directive, and no leaders have suggested the ban, too, was a racist false doctrine. This stance complicates the broader narrative among some members and many historians and scholars who view the ban as fundamentally racist. Historians and scholars both within and outside the church increasingly support the view that the ban was not of divine origin. W. Paul Reeve, for instance, a prominent Latter-day Saint historian and author of, quote, "Let's Talk About Race and Priesthood," unquote, asserts that the prohibition originated with Brigham Young and was not a continuation of the teachings of church founder Joseph Smith, who ordained black men to the priesthood. Reeve and others point out that this shift towards acknowledging the ban's racist roots aligns with a broader trend of reevaluating and confronting past prejudices. For many, this reevaluation is crucial for healing and progression as a faith community. There's speculation that the church's current approach to this sensitive issue may be aimed at preserving its image among the faithful and avoiding a formal apology, which raises questions about the prophetic mantle of its leaders. By framing the ban as a misunderstood directive rather than a mistake, the church may be seeking to justify rather than apologize for its past actions. The legacy of the priesthood and temple ban continues to influence the church's relationship with race. While the 1978 revelation opened the doors for full participation by members of African descent, the journey towards reconciliation and understanding is still ongoing. The increasing acknowledgement among members that the ban was racially motivated marks a significant step in that journey, reflecting a broader commitment on the part of the LDS Church and its members, though slow as it is, to addressing and learning from its past. As the dialogue within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints continues to evolve, it remains to be seen how this growing awareness will shape the church's future perspective on race. But it seems apparent to me, at least, that the LDS Church can never really distance itself from its past racism until it's willing to be vulnerable enough and accountable enough to say it's sorry and no longer defend any morsel of its past racism. For now, it represents a moment of introspection and perhaps a cautious move towards greater inclusivity and understanding. Back to you, Rebecca.
Wow, I was there at that meeting. And I've talked about this before. That was very triggering to see that again. I haven't watched a video since, but the entire event was called the B1 celebration. And it was to celebrate the lifting of the priesthood ban. And there was an amazing mass choir that was led by Gladys Knight herself. It was incredible. They practiced for weeks. My husband was actually in part of the choir. They had choir robes on. There was music. There was song. There were recitations. It was actually sort of a beautiful evening. And it was at the conference center. It was absolutely packed with people. And all of the Q15 were there. So it was a big night. And it was going really well until that clip that you just showed. When President Oaks got up and said those lines that you highlighted, what you didn't see in the clip and what you didn't hear is there was an audible sound of disbelief in the audience. You could hear, did he what? Because what he was saying is, it's not us. I'm sorry. God, what are you going to do?
Without the I'm sorry part.
Yeah, you're right. He did facetiously say, I'm sorry. He just meant it's not us. We would have done it. But God, he's the one that doesn't like you. I mean, it really took a toll, and it did not happen unescaped. People, it did not escape the notice of the people. They definitely had a reaction to that. So, but again, no apology, nothing, just our hands are tied until God decides what he wants to do. So it's a big issue.
Rebecca, when the 2013 gospel topic essay came out on race and priesthood, and that final set of 3 paragraphs at the end, when I read that for the first time, I thought, wow, the church is finally disavowing the ban and the theories behind it. But when you hear Elder Oaks speak and you go back to the gospel topic essay, you realize how carefully worded that disavowal was. Because there's no other way to understand Elder Oaks than to hear him when he says, in general, the Lord rarely gives reasons for the commandments. Again, the 1978 race ban is a commandment that God doesn't need to give a reason for, but then his prophets, seers, and revelators decided to go one step further, give reasoning for that ban, and that's what turns out to be not true. the ban itself, according to Elder Oaks in this quote, is still from God, it's going to, again, I think this will haunt the church forever until they say they're sorry.
It will haunt it. And think about that apology, that false apology written by, do you guys remember who wrote it? I can't remember now.
Streeter.
Yes, I was going to say it was Jonathan Streeter, and nobody wants to say we're hoping there's an apology, but when that false apology, which was very well worded, it sounded like it could have come from the first presidency. When that started circulating, people were like, oh, thank goodness. Finally, they did what we've always wanted them to do. We were hoping they would do it, which is kind of what they said about the ban too, lifting the ban. And then it turned out not to be correct. And that just really highlighted, everybody thinks there should be an apology at some point. What do you think, RFM?
I think that when you have a history of 125 years of building buildings where Black people are specifically not allowed inside, that you can't just go from that. You can change it. Yeah, good. I'm glad you changed it. But you can't go from that to proclaiming yourself as the pinnacle of being against racism without acknowledging it and dealing with it and apologizing for it. They want to go from step 1 to step 3 without doing the step 2. It's the steps of repentance. You would think they would know this by now, but you've got to apologize. Otherwise, your repentance is not valid in the sight of God.
Apology is not one of the steps of repentance. I looked it up for exactly that reason. There's restitution. There's don't do it again. There's not really apology, which is kind of interesting.
And the data that just came out is that 36% now of Latter-day Saints, which to me 20 years ago, this would have been crazy. 36% of Latter-day Saints now think that the priesthood ban itself is a result of racist ridiculousness and not prophetic leadership. And that's only going to get bigger and bigger. And so eventually what happens when you have a church of 75% of people who don't think that the ban came from God at all, and the leadership wants to maintain the Elder Oaks stance that it did, it may be interesting to see what sort of conversations come out of that in another decade or two.
I think so too. And like you talked about in the essays, those final paragraphs, I've heard more people say, when I read that essay, that's when my shelf finally broke. I think that essay does so much damage because it's so obvious that they're trying to wiggle around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. One more thing I would like to mention about this, the lifting of the ban, the politics behind it. I know we've all done podcasts on this, and it's an absolutely fascinating topic. That's another thing when you really dive into how it actually was lifted. It's an incredible story, and it should have happened years earlier. It almost happened years earlier, and then it almost didn't happen. I mean, it's so dramatic having to wait for certain apostles to be in the hospital, having to send some out of the country just so they could get a consensus. It's a crazy story, and I'd like to draw attention to, I'm sorry I don't have a slide, there's a book coming out in June by the wonderful Matthew Harris, and it's called Second Class Saints, Black Mormons and the Struggle for Racial Equality. This is going to be an incredible book about all the politics behind it, everything that happened that allowed the ban to be lifted. And you're going to have to read it to believe it. You may think you know this story, but there is so much to it. So I would encourage everybody to look for Second Class Saints, which is going to be coming out sometime in June.
Rebecca, can I just... go ahead, Bill.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to turn your attention to Doctrine and Covenants, section 58, verses 42 through 43. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I know. But when I looked it up, it was on the church's website, what they had synthesized that to mean.
Right. Well, let's just go to the scriptures by which the church is allegedly bound.
We'll go straight to the scripture.
By this ye may know, if a man repenteth of his sins, behold, he will what? Confess them.
Yes.
And forsake them.
Yes.
They're trying to skip the confess part.
Well, I don't think confession is an apology.
Confession means you're acknowledging publicly that you did something wrong.
Yeah, but that's not okay. I see what on an institutional level. Yes. Yes, I can see that on an institutional level. Yeah, but the actual word apologize, as you would go out to another person and say, I'm sorry, I've hurt you. I didn't see that anywhere. So
right. So President Oaks, the scriptures, your scriptures say that you have to confess your sin. Otherwise, you have not repented of it.
Yeah, and they try to make a discrepancy between like institutional sin, which doesn't deserve any apology, and then the sin of members, right?
Oh yeah,
right?
it
Because
only applies
anything
to
a
us.
leader does isn't a
Mhm.
yeah, anything a leader does is not a person's sin. That's institutional sin. And so the leaders
No.
get off the hook. And by the way, just a note, Elder Oaks lies in that B1 conference more than that time. He lies about the fact about Brigham Young and the prophecy that people will get the people of color will get the priesthood
Right.
when they did, instead of waiting till after the millennium. He also lies about the church having essentially explained that those theories had been done away in 1978. All McConkie said was, forget everything I'd ever said, forget everything Brigham Young said, forget everything everyone else said. He never said that what they said was wrong, and the church
Mhm.
never went into the theories then. It's very deceptive and dishonest, and it's why there's this wide spectrum across the church of people who all believe different things, because nobody in church leadership has the kahunas to set the
cojones.
record straight and explain at what moments things change. Yeah.
Yes.
No, and
Well,
that's absolutely true, because you know why they won't weigh in is because once you weigh in on one side of something, that alienates all the rest of the people who have developed their own different point of view on their
Yeah.
own. So it's better just to remain silent and let everybody work it out amongst themselves. But who was I saying this yesterday? Just yesterday, I was saying to somebody, if you were to look out over a congregation, a sacrament meeting, I guarantee you almost every person is living a different version of Mormonism. And they think it is the version and it's their version, but it's probably very different on certain touch points than the person sitting next to them. And it allows them to stay in and to worship, but it's very different.
yeah, I don't know how well that plan is working for them, actually.
Yeah, I know. I agree.
I think this is
All
part
right.
of the lack of leadership, the failure of leadership that is causing people to abandon this church like the Titanic after it hit the iceberg.
Wow, that sounds like AI. Somebody needs to take that on. All right. Do we have any more thoughts on this, or shall we move on to RFM is going to handle the historic temple building spree? Here we go.
There's a couple of stories I'll touch on. This first one is from the Salt Lake Tribune, May 17th, 2024, written by Tamara Kimsley. And this is extremely important because finally, after Rebecca Biblioteca and her companion Landon Brophy, but mainly Rebecca Biblioteca, has been working her fingers to the bone, researching all this stuff about the temples and all the machinations the church is involved in changing zoning and getting these temples built with their absurdly high steeples in the face of communities that don't want them built there. Finally, the Salt Lake Tribune picked up on the story. So this one's for you, Rebecca.
Oh,
The title, the LDS Church's historic temple building spree is fracturing communities across the country. And the sub headline, from Nevada to Wyoming to Texas, small towns have become neighborhood battlegrounds as feuds break out about the building's height and light. All right, so let me go ahead, and I think I can do it from here. Hot dog. They cover 3 temples. Lone Mountain, Nevada Temple, 70,000 square feet, 215-foot high spire. Now, when you compare this with the other 2 temples that they're talking about in McKinney, Texas, and also the one in, it's not Heber.
I think it's Cody.
It's Cody, right?
Yeah.
This thing is a behemoth. This thing is massive. You can't tell from the picture, right? 70,000 square feet with a 215-foot high spire. Remember that, because the other temples are going to be much smaller as far as their square feet go. All right. So this is Aaron and Matthew Delow. I understand that you know these people, Rebecca.
I do. I text them all the time. They're some of the residents that reached out because they Googled a temple's coming to my town and they happened to come across Mormonish. And so we were able to kind of talk to them and put them in touch with other residents in other towns to share information.
So that's who these people are. Due to Aaron and Matthew Delow's opposition to the temple, both say they've repeatedly been called bigots. Yard signs they plant opposing the temple disappear overnight. And cars periodically sit at the end of their driveway honking. Others have taken an even bolder, brighter approach. We have people setting off fireworks, Aaron said, behind the homes of people who are coming out against the temple. And there is Lone Mountain right there. That's the area. And that's why it's called Lone Mountain, I think, because of this mountain that sits out by itself. All right. After Las Vegas photographer Victoria Brimner, and there's a picture of her down at the bottom, spoke out against the scale and size of the proposed temple, she received a 1-star review on her business's Google page, along with a comment, quote, "Victoria discriminates against other people because of their religious beliefs," period, end of quote. Brimner said she had never received an inquiry from or worked with the person. In other words, this is completely gratuitous and retaliatory, by the way. "We're in the United States of America, and there are people living in fear of a church," Aaron said. "That's just mind-blowing to me." Then there's the Cody, Wyoming temple, which is only 10,000 square feet. Remember the other one? How big was that one? Do you remember?
70.
70,000
Yes.
square feet in Nevada. Incredible. So here's the one in Cody, 10,000 square feet and a 101-foot high spire. There's Cody. That's where the temple's going. The city's planning, this is for Cody, the city's planning and zoning board approved a site plan for the temple and then walked it back. After it was determined, the vote didn't count due to the absence of multiple board members. Attorneys for the church sued, and the city ultimately signed off on the site plan with some restrictions, including limits on outdoor lighting. In response, the grassroots group Preserve Our Cody Neighborhoods quickly filed a petition in district court as a last line of defense against an LDS corporation that has threatened and intimidated our community by going to court. Despite ongoing efforts to halt progress on the temple, equipment has been moved to the site. Then there's the McKinney, Texas temple. This one's 43,000 square feet. So this is somewhere in between the size of the Cody temple and the Lone Mountain temple in Nevada. It has a 173-foot tall spire. And I put this little thing that I found on the internet down here. It has nothing to do with temples or LDS, but I thought it was funny because it says better than McKinney, Fairview, Texas, right? And it's called the McKinney Temple, but it's actually being built in Fairview, Texas, which is a neighboring town. In April, church officials emailed area members asking them to write the Fairview planning manager in support of the project, specifically the spire and how wonderfully tall it is. "The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance," the email stated, explaining that it serves the purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts to heaven and expresses a message of faith and devotion to God, which was news to all the Mormons that were directed to send these emails expressing these sentiments. Green called this framing misleading. Some Latter-day Saint temples, including ones in Hawaii and Arizona, have no steeples. She also said she is sympathetic to a feeling among residents of being spoken at instead of being listened to. The church had an opportunity to come to the community and ask for input, she said, or find an area that would already accept the plan they had in place without having to fight for exemptions. Instead, Salt Lake headquarters has come with a plan that requires exemptions and is preemptively asking members to be on the offensive. The approach may be backfiring, really thanks largely to Rebecca Biblioteca. It's true. In a packed May 9th hearing, the town's Planning and Zoning Committee voted to recommend council members reject the proposal. According to CBS, the town's mayor plans to do just that, even with the church's attorney threatening to sue. And there's a nice little, see it, longhorn down there? That's how you know it's Texas. Okay, continuing. Oh, and here's this wonderful meme that I got from Rebecca. Because I had actually heard from a listener who was in a place that he represented as being a position that he would know, is that the theological reason that's starting to be bruited about for why they're building so many temples when they don't need them, because the membership is going down while the temples are increasing in number and size. But they're starting to say that this is for the millennium. Jesus is so close to coming again. The millennium's going to start. Actually, the millennium started 24 years ago. We're already 24 years into the millennium, for crying out loud. I don't know why they're still looking forward to it, but they are. I think it's just kind of a justification maneuver. But I want to I think everybody knows that the millennium is a 1,000-year period after the second coming of Jesus in which Satan is bound. There is peace in the land, and temple work goes on nonstop in order to perform the saving ordinances here on earth that those who have passed away need to be saved and exalted. That is the LDS understanding of the millennium. I want to go to the comment on the right if I can. Elder Bernard, this is coming from a person who was present at a meeting where Elder Bernard, or actually talking to a person who was at the meeting, so it's a bit third hand. Elder Bernard told a Kentucky Stake this weekend that people in the audience would live to see the second coming. Boy, when have we heard that before? Like 200 years ago? Like 2,000 years ago? Like always? Okay. People in the audience would live to see the second coming, and that the current massive temple building is for millennium temple work. That's why Jesus is so close to coming. Again, we're getting a head start, according to a person close to me who attended. And then there's a quote from Elder M. Russell Ballard. I miss him already, where he said, we're building these temples not only for us in this moment of our history, but we're building temples which will be used during the millennium, when this great work will be carried on in the house of the Lord, houses of the Lord, under the direction and supervision of the Lord Jesus Christ himself. So I don't think that has anything to do with it, honestly. I think this is a vanity project that is promoted by President Nelson, but I think this is the theological rationale that's starting to be given in order to try and justify what otherwise makes absolutely zero sense. What are your thoughts?
I would say
Well,
you
I
hang
for
on
one
to the. Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say, I'm just excited that finally some bigger news sources are picking up the big picture, because that's important. Go ahead,
Rebecca,
Bill.
that's very humble of you, because you are the cause of this. You were the cause. You're making some very powerful enemies. And for a
Well,
fee, I will give out your address. But
please do.
no, you really are, because these are the people that you're giving away the playbook. You're connecting all these different temples together, all these, including Heber, including Bakersfield, which is going up now. And you have identified now the playbook that the church uses to go in early to change the zoning requirements before anybody even knows that they're going to be building a temple there. So they got no idea what's coming. Then they come in and then they do what they're going to do. And it's the We Say So Corporation. You're going to do what we say. Why? Because we say so. And because we got money, and we'll sue you into oblivion if you try and get in our way. What were you going to say, Bill?
Just that that quote by Elder Ballard on the bottom left, you'll have to play the long game, but I can guarantee you this will eventually someday, 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, whatever it is, that quote will turn out to be a false prophecy. He is saying that the temples the church is building at the time of that quote will last into the millennium when Christ comes. And since I'm pretty confident that Jesus is never coming again, then that quote will not age well, although all of us will be gone and not able to see that it didn't come to pass.
I find your lack of faith disturbing. But
Well,
isn't it already true with the Salt Lake Temple? Did not Brigham Young say that we're going to build this temple not on the sandstone, but on the granite? We're going to tear out the foundation. We're going to throw in the granite, because this temple is going to last what? Through the millennium. Through the millennium. But now it's being taken apart and put back together, and the millennium hasn't even started yet.
And it's not
yet.
You can argue it, but if you change the head and the handle, is it still George Washington's axe? And you can say taking the temple apart and putting it back together, but the reality is now it's another building. It's been the foundation's been if you take George Washington, you're shaking your head.
No, that's the
RFM.
boat. Theseus's boat, right?
Yeah, you take it all
Yeah,
apart, you put all
idea.
new pieces in, replace every plank. Is it still Theseus's boat? It's not. So there you go.
Did I ever tell you guys my temple foundation story about the Salt Lake Temple? Have we been
would love to hear
podcasting
this
together
story.
long enough that I've retold my stories?
Tell it again, please.
So, okay. So we've all heard that story, right? That the temple was built on sandstone, and Brigham Young said, no, stop. We've got to start over. It will be on a granite foundation. It will last forever, right? So some friends and I, including my co-host Landon, some people from my book club, were up there in Salt Lake. And there's this very nice little senior guide, this gentleman who's standing outside, and we're looking at the temple, the big pit and everything. He goes, have you heard that story about the granite and the foundation? And we said, yes, we have. And he said, you know what? It was on sandstone. It was never on granite. There was
Wait.
sandstone. And yes.
Are you kidding? They didn't.
I'm not kidding you.
They moved the tombstones, but they left the bodies?
Well, I'm just saying that he said that story, and he was telling it as an amusing anecdote. But of course, my co-host and I are like, You know? Yeah, that's what he said, that the sandstone was still there. That was just like I guess a faith promoting rumor or something. Or maybe he was talking about just one part of it. So if anyone wants to fact check me, I don't know. This is what this wonderful, kindly older gentleman told me, is that there was no granite. It was a sandstone foundation.
Oh my gosh.
All along.
Well,
I
chalk
know.
that up with the conduits they had built in that elevators would fit in perfectly.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
places for the air conditioning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep, they were
absolutely.
very
Those were all left
forward-thinking.
in because Brigham Young had it dialed in. He knew what was coming in the future, and he knew how to prepare for it.
And he knew.
Meanwhile, elevators already existed, I think.
They
Yeah.
did.
across
I
the-
actually believe those things
I
when
know.
I was younger.
all
I thought those
did.
were so fantastic. How
Yeah.
amazing. This church is so true.
Name one faith promoting story that turned out to actually be true.
Well, I don't know. There's my testimony.
Oh. Well, as I always say, Christians in 3084, Jesus is coming, right? It's always going to be that way. So, but the residents that I work with in these cities, that's their question. Why? There's a temple just over there. Why does there have to now be one here in my backyard? They all ask this because they all live within, maybe 30 minutes, if not closer, of other temples. And I think this is an answer that they can have, is that, this concept of the millennium in Mormonism and this concept of temples on every street corner. That's what I learned when I was growing up. There'd be a temple on every single street corner. And, what's he saying? Okay. There you go.
So I'm guessing that's not true, Dan. Dan Vogel says Brigham Young said sandstone would get harder in time, but granite would become softer. I'm not sure that's true. Is that true? Of course, it's not true.
I do not know. We might have to do some kind of
If it
experiment.
were true, they wouldn't have to be doing all the renovations to this.
Yeah, I don't think this is true, but I think it's true that Brigham Young said it.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, if anyone is in the area, you should go check out those renovations. I mean, I don't think people realize what they're doing to that area. There's now the temple, and there's these two sort of temple-looking pavilions sitting in front of the temple, different entrance pavilions of what they're called. There's a baptistry underground, not even in the temple. Like, it's very different, and it seems to kind of be following those plans that we all looked at last summer, if you remember those, where it was more like a destination, a theme park or something. They're making some big changes. I would suggest anybody who wants to know, go look, because it's pretty fascinating. So
I'm looking forward to the roller coaster.
a people mover was in those plans that we all read. A people mover.
People mover. Oh my gosh.
Mover.
That takes me back to Disneyland.
Yeah, that I'm trying not to say Disneyland, but that's kind of what I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
So it's great. Well, thank you for covering that, RFM. It's really important. And I encourage everybody to go read that article or watch any podcasts about temple building, because it is pretty fascinating, and it's kind of the church in a microcosm. So, all right. I think there was another really important story that RFM is going to cover.
This is from Jana Reese. It was published, the Religion News Services, May 18th, 2024, titled Eternal Polygamy: How LDS Temple Sealings and Cancellations Became a Raw Deal for Women. Surprise, church policies around temple sealings and cancellations used to be more equal for women than they are today. What happened? And I think by more equal, she means that women could be sealed to multiple men instead of just men being able to be sealed to multiple women, which is the way it is today. So she goes to an article that was written by Nathan Oman. This history unfolds in an excellent article in the fall 2023 issue of the Journal of Mormon History. Legal scholar Nathan Oman, a law professor at the William and Mary in Virginia, picture below, painstakingly traces how temple sealing rules developed in a rather piecemeal fashion over time. It's a complex story that I will try to boil down into 5 main stages. Stage 1. In the 19th century, temple marriage was surprisingly capacious. Some men were sealed to multiple wives, and some women were sealed to multiple husbands. Every time Joseph Smith married somebody who was married to somebody else, he was creating a situation where a woman was married to multiple men. Okay? If those earthly bonds were dissolved through a divorce, the temple sealings remained intact for both men and women, even if they remarried other people. This resulted, Oman notes, in numerous living women being sealed to 2 or more men. That's how it used to be. Of course, that's not allowed today. Stage 2, shortly before the turn of the century, and that would be the century before the last one, I think, a belief developed that the sealing power included the authority to cancel sealing. So this is toward the end of the 19th century, the 1800s, where all of a sudden now they start thinking, wait, we can cancel these sealings too. In some cases, the church president began to intervene to cancel temple sealings, but this was rare, an extraordinary action reserved for cases of abuse or apostasy, and did not generally affect people whose first marriage had ended in divorce or death. Those church members, both male and female, could remarry in the temple without canceling their first sealing. So this was going on up until the end of the 19th century. Stage 3. In the early 20th century, sealing cancellations became more codified. Oh, wait, there's that word again. Say it with me. It's codified.
It's codified.
It's codified and common, and a gender divide appeared. As the century progressed, cancellation of sealings was formalized in a way that ironically emphasized the continuing theological vitality of plural marriage at precisely the moment when, in practical terms, the church was moving decisively to stamp out polygamous diehards in its own ranks. And that's a real interesting observation there. Under the new rules, men could be sealed to 2 or more women as long as they were married in life to only one woman at a time. In other words, if they weren't practicing this world polygamy. But a woman could only be sealed to one man, either in life or posthumously. Oman says this limitation for women entered Latter-day Saint life in the 1930s, appearing in the handbook for the first time in 1944. So that sounds like it's starting to move toward the way it is today. And that would have been the end of the story, except for what happened in 1944. This is what makes it a separate stage. Stage 4, almost immediately, the church was inundated with requests for exceptions because, did you catch the timing of that handbook rule, 1944? Young women who had been made widows by World War II but still had their whole lives ahead of them naturally wanted to remarry in the temple. And the church allowed many to do so, permitting them to remarry another man for eternity without canceling their first sealing to the husband who had died in the war. So even after the handbook stipulated that living women could be sealed to only one man, the vagaries of life and death called for case-by-case exceptions. And finally, stage 5, and this is what we have today. In the mid to late 20th century, as it ramped up its genealogical efforts to do proxy temple rituals for the dead, the church confronted a major roadblock. Many of the historical marriages it was unearthing in its research had been interrupted by early death. Suppose a woman had married, lost her husband, and then remarried, having children with both husbands. How were her descendants to know which husband she wanted to be with in the hereafter? Should modern strangers be authorized to make that kind of decision on her behalf? Probably not. So the church changed the policy for deceased women. And here we have the wonderful situation where deceased women are actually treated more equally in the church in this regard than living women. In 1969, David O. McKay extended this rule more generally, deciding that the rules for living sealings for women, which by then allowed a woman to be sealed to only one man, were unworkable for proxy work, i.e. for those who had passed on. Rather, deceased women were to be sealed by proxy to all of the men to whom they had been sealed while living. Without acknowledging and perhaps realizing it, the church thus returned to something like the position that had existed in the early 20th century. But the basic inequality still exists. Living men get to be sealed to all of their wives forever, if that's their choice. Living women can be sealed to only one man, even if that's not their choice. Both groups routinely hear that it will all work out in the hereafter. Meanwhile, dead women can be sealed to multiple men, just as dead and living men can be sealed to multiple women. See, sisters, Equality is coming. You just need to be 6 feet under first. And there's some pictures of everything working out right in the afterlife. And I think that is it. Yes, it is. Rebecca, I know that you have some comments about this. We were talking about this earlier.
I have a
Let's go
lot
ahead
of
with those.
comments about this. Yeah, but I think we'll let Bill go first. What are your thoughts, Bill? Had you read this article before? Or is this the first time you're hearing it?
It seems as though this is the first time I've read this article, but I've heard this conversation before.
Right.
Having served as a bishop, I had several people come in and wanting to initiate sort of that process of having a temple cancellation canceled, or being the other spouse in a divorce and having to write a letter to advocate for your ex-spouse or to criticize your ex-spouse. The process is insane. Here's what I would say. There are exceptions made to those. First off, the rules suck. There are exceptions to those rules, but who gets to have the exception? Who gets to be the living female who actually does get sealed to a second man? Often depends on people who have influence or notoriety in the church, who are the relatives of the general authorities. They're the television stars or the folks who are sort of famous in the celebrity world. They get special exceptions. This isn't a church that divvies up these sorts of privileges in a fair way. It really is those who rub shoulders with the brethren get special favors.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right on that. So, this is a really interesting article. I would suggest that everybody go find it and read it in its entirety. And the title actually is A Welding Link of Some Kind, a doctrinal way forward for same-sex sealings. Because the point of this article, and going through all of these steps, which you, RFM, absolutely summarized perfectly, it's complex if you think about it. The point is the one man, one woman sealed in the next life, that nuclear family, that's the exception. That's not the rule. If you really look at all the kinds of sealings that are out there, it is a hot mess. On my podcast, Mormonish, we did a podcast about this article, and my co-host tried to make a chart, exactly what you were saying, RFM. If you're sealed to a woman who's married to someone else, there's a line here, you're sealed to it's just dogs and cats living together. The next life is not clear at all. There are many exceptions to this one man, one woman, including God himself, right? With multiple wives. So this idea that this is how it has to be, this is how it's always been, that's not necessarily correct. And so the point of the article is kind of, isn't there wiggle room? Isn't there a place or a reason to revisit this and see what sealings between all kinds of people would look like? So it is very interesting. But in terms of women and sealings, yeah, I think this has been an issue for women, especially for a long time, because they notice this in practice. And I think they probably hear about it more than men, unless you're a bishop. And I remember RFM and we're talking about this. Do you remember, Bill, the Oaks conference talk back in 2019, where he said, I received a letter from a woman and she was contemplating marrying someone whose spouse had died. She would be the second wife. And she wanted to know if she would have her own house in the next life, or would she have to share it with this woman? And everyone in the audience laughed. And President Oaks laughed, which I thought was funny because that actually is his second wife's scenario. Like, I wanted to ask, did she write this letter to you? But it's a legitimate question. And I think he kind of downplayed it by making the joke about, well, I have my own house. That's not what this woman was asking. She wants to know the details of what life looks like as a second wife, as, being part of this trio. What is it? The realities. And of course, RFM, do you remember the answer?
Basically, you just have to trust God.
Uh-huh.
Have faith that it'll work out.
Yeah. So it's so funny because these rules, they seem to be so arbitrary and changeable, yet then they're enforced very strictly. I mean, you probably had guidelines you had to follow, Bill, when people came in and said, can we change this or what can we do? And yet the answer in the end is, just trust. It's going to be okay. You'll like the way it looks. It's going to be all right. And I that's not good enough to people who really believe in this structure, and it causes them a lot of pain. Like, I have a friend who has a relative who was married to someone. It did not work out. They were married in the temple, and he refuses this temple divorce. She's since remarried, but he, every once in a while, periodically reminds her, you will be mine in the next, in a very just terrifying way to this woman, right? Who wants to hear this? So, it really needs to be looked into farther. It's very detrimental, I think, to women's mental health, and it's just demeaning. But then there's one redeeming factor. In all of the literature, it says no one will have to do anything they don't want to do. So it sounds to me like a woman can just say, nah, not so much when she gets there, right?
Wait a
do you
minute.
interpret it that way?
Wait a minute. Elder Bednar, when he changed free agency to moral agency or representative agency, he said that you no longer could just do what you wanted to do.
That's true.
That you had to do what you had covenanted to do, which was to do all that you could do, right?
Yeah, there is
I
that.
don't know.
It's true. I don't know either. But the bottom line is we don't know. We have absolutely no idea if we believed in this. Of course, we're talking about it in a figurative way, but people that really do believe, we don't know. And it's not what you think it is. It's not one man, one woman. Given all this history of sealing over the last couple centuries, it's men, women and multiple men and multiple women. It's all kinds. It's dynastic sealings where you have entire family lines sealed to a prophet. So it's not what anybody thinks. What do you think, RFM?
I've rarely seen 15 men work so hard to display zero leadership skills. They've got nothing. They have nothing. I don't know what we're paying them for.
And they are paid well.
And they are paid well. That's exactly right. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to read that original article. It is extremely interesting. And you kind of see how the church went through these phases. And you're right, what you talked about, RFM, once they decided, it kind of made it sound in the article like the idea of the temple was that you got married there, but it wasn't necessarily something you went back to all the time, because there were only 10 in the world.
Yes.
Then when they started this idea of, no, this is going to keep people bound to the church through tithing, through covenants. Let's have more temples. Let's have more ordinances. Then we're out of names, right? Hence indexing, genealogy, and this idea of the nuclear family, because that's very important to make sure that everybody is sealed as their nuclear family, husband, wife, children. And they say that's how it's always been, but articles like this show that it's absolutely not. It is the exception and it's not the rule. And it's important to realize that.
And when you say read the article in its entirety, you're referring to the article by Nate Oman?
I am, yes. Or, the Salt Lake Tribune article does a good job of summarizing it, but his article itself, which is much longer, is really good.
Yeah, I like it because I consider it an extended Omanism.
There you go.
Look at you just spreading your seed of ideas all around.
Yeah.
Look at you getting the dirty references. How come it's only the dirty jokes that I make that you get, Bill?
I don't know. Must be the way my mind works.
The newscast is taking a dive, isn't it? It's not great. Or if you don't want to read the article, I'll plug my own podcast on Mormonish. We did it. We covered the whole article very well. And you can see Landon's graph because it was extremely telling. I mean, once Joseph Smith, as you said, RFM, married a woman who was already married to a man, sort of by the Pythagorean theorem, Joseph Smith is married to that man. Or sealed, right? And then he might have another wife, and it just goes around and around. So it's
almost like West Virginia.
It's like West Virginia. That's right. Okay. Do we have any more to say about sealing?
You know what the biggest job in the history of the United States was, Bill?
What's that?
Wheeling, West Virginia.
Wheeling, West Virginia. Yeah.
That is a really, really old joke. And for some reason, it's a joke. It's the only joke I think of when somebody says West Virginia.
Are there a lot of jokes about West Virginia?
If everybody's married to everybody,
let's see. Are we up to me? We might be up to me now.
You know the definition of mass what is it called? Mass hysteria. Is that what it's called? Mass hysteria? The definition of mass hysteria? I can't remember. Father's Day in West Virginia.
Okay. All right. The article moving on. That's right. The article that I decided to cover, because this is near and dear to my heart and it scarred my childhood and my young adulthood, is an article about seminary. And we're talking early morning seminary. If we have viewers or listeners that don't know what that is, it's kind of extra religious instruction. You go to a classroom for Mormon teens. And in some places in the United States, there's a building right next to your high school or your junior high, and you can just walk next door. It's an extra period where you don't get to take an elective. But for those of us that grew up not in Morador, early morning was usually how you had to do it. And when I say early, I mean early. So this article is called "There Are No Easy Answers. LDS Parents Wonder If Early Morning Seminary is Worth the Health Costs. Is rising before dawn for religious study laudable or lamentable. Research increasingly shows the dangers of sleep deprivation of high schoolers. So it says LDS parents wonders. My LDS parents did not wonder at all in the late 70s and early 80s at all. I was going and there was no way around it. So it says Latter-day Saints teens living in Utah and other areas with high numbers of church members often have the option of attending seminary during the school day in a building off campus. Like I said, for others, the 4-year program represents more than a chance for teens to pore over their sacred texts together. It's a rite of passage, a way for young people to signal their commitment to their faith by laying sleep on the altar of study. And that is true. It was definitely viewed that way. Someone in the article said, I attended the seminary kickoff before the school year. This is a mother in Las Vegas with 2 kids in seminary. It was built up and presented as a life-changing experience that comes when you make a huge sacrifice. That is true. And I still kind of find myself in that trap. The slide I'm going to show you next is me bragging and also wanting to get a lot of sympathy for what I had to do when I was 15 and 16 years old. So this was my personal early morning seminary schedule. I wish I would have taken a picture of myself in the morning, but I didn't. So at 4:45, I would get woken up by my parents for personal scripture study. And so that meant that I'd be laying in bed. My dad would come and, knock me on the shoulder, prop my scriptures up in front of me, open, kind of held open by a pillow. And I would lay there like this, and I would soak in the scriptures. That was my scripture study for 15 minutes, my personal scripture study. So at 5 a.m., I'd get dressed, sometimes just like pajama bottom, sweatshirt. I mean, it was dark outside still, you can picture. 5:15, the carpool arrives. Or if you're the one driving, if you're 16 and you can drive, then you have to leave, start everything about half an hour earlier. 5:15 it arrives and you drive across town if you're me, and 5:45 in the morning is when seminary starts. And I couldn't remember exactly how long seminary was. Neither of you guys went, but I think it was about an hour. And then we drive back across town, go home,
I think
get
it's
ready.
like 50 minutes.
Yeah, and go to school. So that right there, I want all the sympathy and empathy that you can give to me. That was my schedule. And it's funny because I kept a journal like a lot of teenagers. And when I reread those years, the first line, almost every single page is, I'm so tired. I was so tired today. I could hardly keep my eyes open today. I fell asleep today. That just repeats over and over and over in all of my seminary journals. And that's what this article is about. So they're talking about a mounting body of evidence indicates that teens not only need more sleep than adults, but also that hormonal shifts make it harder for them to go to bed before 10 or 11. And I remember that, trying to go to bed early, but you just can't fall asleep. And at the same time, researchers have gained a clearer picture of the risks associated with teen sleep deprivation. Among them are serious mental health issues and also substance abuse. Taken together, these findings are prompting Latter-day Saint parents to reevaluate the benefits of sending their teens out to study scriptures at the crack of dawn. Now, am I right in saying that neither of you guys, you both joined the church as older teenagers, so you never did have to do this? Is that
I was
right?
just wondering, yes, you're the only one. So I'm wondering, was it mental health issues, serious mental health issues, or substance abuse in your case?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. I literally, as I read that, knew you would say that. So
I thought maybe you're going to tell us something.
no, I don't have any other slide about my own personal life. We'll just be general from here on out. So,
Okay.
but it's interesting to me that in my day, LDS parents weren't saying that. There was never a question, is this good for my child? Even though I'm sure my parents saw me like a zombie, walking around, because then you have after school activities. You don't get home till late in the evening. And then the cycle starts up again. 4:30, here you go, read your scriptures. But apparently now LDS parents are sort of looking at their kids and going, I wonder if this is the best choice. So we get into some data about from sleep experts. So as sleep expert Matthew Walker explains in a book, Why We Sleep, adolescents are hardwired to hit the sack after most adults, thanks to a 1 to 3 hour shift forward in their circadian rhythm. In other words, adults and teens are essentially living in different time zones. I thought that was really interesting. I wish I'd known that before. That would have helped me with my own kids. They're literally in another time zone than you are. Meanwhile, researchers have begun to raise an ever louder din regarding the dangers associated with sleep deprivation in young adults. Tired teens, studies recently have discovered, are more prone to major depression and risky behavior, including drug experimentation. One study published in 2023 found that sleep-deprived adolescents were about twice as prone to suicide ideation and consideration, even when adjusting for sexual identity, trauma, bullying, and other related factors. Another published the year before suggested a possible link between poor adolescent sleep and increased risk of schizophrenia. So the data is basically saying, parents beware, be aware of your teenager, take a look at what they're doing and maybe reassess. Of course, this is very difficult because we're talking about the church has asked you to do this. And so that's what I mean. There's a difference, I think, in parents today. So, church spokesman Sam Penrod said that the faith is aware of the concerns of some parents and the research involving the well-being of high school students. Of equal note, he says, studies are indicating a strong positive link between faith and religious community in the overall health and mental wellness of young people. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in addition to Sunday worship and the weekly summertime activities, they often enroll in seminary. So he's saying, yes, we understand that, but it's really important to bond with your friends, get the instruction. You have to make sure that you do that too. So it's sort of something that they're basically leaving it up to parents to decide, and the parents are now starting to put it more on the kids. I thought was interesting. And some of the things I read that they're saying, well, it's up to you. In my day, that wasn't the case. You go, it's my way or the highway to seminary. That's the only thing that you did.
It sounds like Sam Penrod is saying, yeah, we understand about the apples, but look at these oranges over here.
Yeah. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So they go on to talk about how there are some different options. Like I said, there's during school seminary, but of course that means you give up an elective. And some of these kids today, they just absolutely pack their schedule. They're getting into college. They're in band. They're in debate. They're in theater. Seminary means that you give up an elective. There is also the option in some places for online seminary. So that could be something too. Let's see. They talked to a parent, Jed Fowers, of a seminary-aged kids, and also a volunteer seminary teacher himself. And I think we'll have Bill talk about that in a minute because he himself just told us that he was an early morning seminary teacher. So that'll be interesting to hear about. Anyway, in 2022, this particular teacher went on Facebook, and it was a page for fellow seminary instructors. And he asked the question, is there a better way? Is this a problem? Are we doing something that's detrimental to the kids? In his post, he cited the research about teens and sleep. Within a few days, he had close to 200 responses on a page that usually had about 10 or 20 responses. Clearly, he had hit a nerve. Of the responses, nearly 70 defended the current model, of course, but just as many voiced their similar concerns. So I thought that was kind of interesting that even seminary teachers are questioning, because they're the ones that have to look out into the class and see my AI there of a kid just going, oh my goodness. I do remember a lot of sleeping in seminary. A lot of kids just wore their pajamas, put their heads down on their desk. It was just impossible to keep anybody awake. They also go on to talk about just a family getting everybody out the door at 5:30 in the morning. It can cause a lot of contention. Everybody's struggling. They're tired. They're going. They've got to drive across town. It's not a peaceful way to start the day. And they also, of course, talk, like I just mentioned, on the demands of, a full schedule, basketball practice, band practice, our kids having to give up other activities that also give you a sense of community, form friendships just for seminary. So it's definitely a question. But again, the bottom line is the church has said seminary is the most important place that you're supposed to be. So another parent kind of weighs in and says it's reasonable to question early morning seminary and say, is this the only way? So parents are starting to see it. What this particular parent is less comfortable with is the secondary importance that seminary seems to take in scheduling students' lives. Teens gathering to study the scriptures each weekday with an engaged and committed adult, like a Bill Reel, to study this is powerful, she said, and it deserves to be a priority. So again, it's that, what's your priority? What's more important to you? Is it important that your kids get this kind of instruction and this kind of, group setting, or now you're reading the research about sleep and you're not sure exactly what to do. So the really interesting part, of course, is one voice has been completely and conspicuously absent from the conversation these parents and seminary teachers are having with the church itself. Um, we wish there was some kind of mechanism to engage with leaders of the church educational system that oversees seminary program about how the current program is working and perhaps how it could evolve to better help youth deepen their conversion to the gospel. After all, they reason, isn't that the point? And a lot of things that I read said that individual stakes and wards kind of decide on how seminary works. They kind of pull the parents and decide what time is going to work. But again, what works for one parent is not going to work for another family. So it becomes a difficult issue, and there are a lot of feelings about it. So I decided that I would go out onto Ex-Mormon Reddit, of course, because that's where I go to get all of my information. And I put up a post and I said, hey, early morning seminary, anybody do it? Pros and cons. There were some really funny answers about pros, but there were some actual sincere answers. So I'm going to read a couple of these because I think these are representational of how I felt when I went to seminary, and I bet a lot of you did. So one person wrote that a con, of course, is overly tired and sleepy due to being a teenager and barely getting anything out of it, getting to school constantly exhausted from having to wake up at 5:30 every morning and hitting the wall around 1 o'clock. That's exactly right. And barely able to stay awake. And then due to constant exhaustion and sleepiness, some kids are out there on the road driving to church, putting themselves and others at risk. Many times I got to the church sort of amazed at how quickly we got there because I was sort of half asleep the entire time driving. And that is exactly my experience. You kind of go, oh, I woke up. Here we are. Oh, good. We're all okay. So, people have strong feelings about this. Someone else writes, waking up at 4:30 every morning. I wonder if this was one of my high school friends. That was our schedule. Severe sleep deprivation in high school, not seeing the sun for half the year. Yeah, because you're up before dawn. Unable to do jazz band or AP calculus, lifelong sleep issues, and also religious indoctrination. So that was interesting. Let's see. Another one is waking up so early for the 6 a.m. start. Often had to have family scripture reading before leaving for seminary. Okay, whoever this is, I got you there. That's what we did. And not being able to take a 0-period class like driver's ed. Car wrecks from racing to school after seminary, and one fairly serious. I actually saw that too in my days in seminary. I thought this was a very comprehensive one as a con. This person says, let me see if I can get to it. It literally effed with my sleep schedule so badly and sucked away my mental and physical health because I was not getting the sleep I needed in order to grow and function as a human being. I would get yelled at for sleeping and napping in the middle of the day because I had untreated insomnia and would only get 3 or 4 hours sleep max. And I would sleep 12 hours on the weekend. Not to mention and this is something they didn't bring up in the articles, but this is my experience too. Not to mention I was not eating breakfast or lunch because I had to be out the door first thing in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. I did not get to eat most of the time, and I had one giant meal at home, which I usually made myself when I had no energy at the end of the day. I was snacking 80% of the time. I always felt hungry, sleep deprived during school hours, which effed with my grades badly. Then I had to stand at a freezing cold bus stop for an entire hour, which led to getting some nerve damage on my nose, ears, toes, and fingertips for a while that took years to heal, and I'm assuming was mild frostbite. Yeah, I do remember waiting for my carpool out in the cold, freezing weather. Not to mention, I learned nothing from the lessons. The lessons were literally worthless in every aspect to me because our teacher wouldn't even be teaching half the time. And maybe I'll add for bill or show up, right? They'd go on some tangent and then hand out homework as if real school didn't already give us enough stress. None of which I ever filled out because I barely was getting my real homework done. It was goddamn awful for me personally, and I will never, ever do anything similar ever again. So this person has some very strong feelings. They definitely vented about seminary. Now, I was trying to be fair, and I wanted to see if anybody could come up with any positives. And I have to say, I agree with almost all of these pros. And these are from people from the perspective of being a kid, not the perspective of a parent who said, I sent my kid and it helped them. These are kids. So here's somebody who says, as a pro to seminary, I actually think it beneficial to study the New Testament in a classroom setting. I was asked to read the text in depth on a daily basis. Long story short, it did not increase my faith. I noticed a big difference between what the church said and what this guy, whose name is the one on the building, allegedly said. It was one of my first shelf items, and it also gave me the basic information to discuss my faith crisis internally and with others. So I thought that was great. Another person said, we would carpool to high school after seminary as the sun rose. We listened to Imagine Dragons Radioactive. It was brand new back then, with the bass all the way up, and sing along. I felt like the coolest teenager ever and really valued those friendships, especially since I didn't have friends in high school. The chance to hang out with my church friends every morning before school was kind of nice. And that's true. You have the camaraderie, you have the friendship, and you're doing something extremely hard. Getting up early, you're kind of all in it together. So I agree with that too. There is not real personal gain from seminary. It's just an indoctrination program, of which the church has many. I know a friend who got sent to Hong Kong for his mission, and the church used his 4 years attending seminary school as proof that he was a trained missionary and needed a visa. I had never thought of that you could use the seminary experience as sort of evidence that you could get a visa as being a minister. If there's any pro to seminary, it's only for the church and not for the student. Another person said, some teachers made us hot chocolate and some cute boys were in my class. That is true. Early morning seminary teachers did tend to bring treats and donuts and things like that. And maybe this was my favorite. I don't know. My buddy, the bishop's son, brought porn and beer to share, assuming after seminary, on the walk to school. So there it is. That's it.
It's always those bishop kids.
It is. It's always the bishop kids. So now, I didn't know this before the show. I asked both I assumed RFM no, because you joined when you were older than high school, but I wondered about Bill. And why don't you tell us what you said about seminary? You do have some experience.
Tell him myself. So go ahead.
You are the engaged and committed adult they referred to it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I was going to Bowling Green State University to be an elementary teacher. So under the spirit of discernment, the bishopric prayed about who the next seminary teacher should be for the Sandusky ward. They prayed about me. They actually had two seminary teachers. I would teach the Sandusky kids that were close that way, and then there would be another seminary teacher that would teach the kids that were further away from the ward building. Some of these kids would drive a half hour to come to the ward building to have seminary. I was just a 19, 20, 21-year-old kid. I don't remember how old I was, but I was young, newly married, and serving as a seminary teacher in so many times. I only did it 1 year. That's because I failed at it miserably and they gave up on me. But so many times that year, the alarm would go off. I'd be half asleep because it was too damn early for me too. And I would think I was pushing the snooze button, and I would push the off button, and off to sleep I went. And next thing you know, I'd get a phone call from the ward building, from the kids actually out in their car with their parents, and calling and saying, where's the seminary teacher at? Or why are you not here? And I would say, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to make it in today. And that happens so many times that those kids still have a certain degree of trauma that they've carried with them from driving a half hour, 40 minutes to the ward building with no seminary teacher there to open it up and do seminary. So I failed. Sorry, folks.
Yeah. I think you did the best you could. It's rough. And it makes me think, why not just call the parents that are carpooling? They have to drive there anyway. I mean, before I could drive, when I was 15, we had a wonderful mother in the neighborhood, and she would get all of us kids and load us in her station wagon. This is, again, leaving at 5:15 in the morning. She did this every day, and she would park the station wagon in the seminary building parking lot. She would climb into a sleeping bag in the back of the station wagon, and she would sleep there and wait for us to come out. And we thought it was kind of funny. We kind of, teased about it. But as a grown-up, as a mother, I salute you, because who would do that? This woman was committed. And I believe she was committed to our, eternal salvation, because otherwise, why would she do this? It was amazing.
Indeed. And I've got one comment for Bill, then one for Rebecca. Bill, I'm sorry. It's not mass hysteria. Of course, it's mass confusion. Father's Day in West Virginia. Okay. So I want to correct that. And Rebecca, do Do you have your dog with you next to you
Oh
on the
my
couch?
gosh. Again,
Yeah, do
seriously?
you?
I do, but she's asleep. Maybe she won't growl.
You can't hold her up, can you? She won't let you hold her.
Oh
What's her
no,
name?
she's so sweet. Her name's Alice. She's really
Alice.
cute and blonde.
You know why you couldn't take Alice with you to seminary in the morning?
Why not?
Because then it would be pet seminary.
Oh my gosh. We knew we had to go there. Ah,
Thank you. You heard it
that's
here
good.
first.
Well, what do you guys think though about the fact that unlike our parents, people are now saying, gosh, I don't know. They're looking at their kids and their kids' health and mental health in a different way. And they're weighing it against their eternal salvation, I guess, and tried to figure it out. I thought that was really just a shift and very interesting.
All these stories, by the way, whether it's the general public criticizing the church with the temples, whether it's people deciding to go against what Elder Oaks says about the priesthood ban, whether it's parents and kids standing up for their own health when it comes to early morning seminary, what I'm noticing across the entire church is that the membership is developing the fortitude and wherewithal to sort of stand their own internal ground and not allow the church to manipulate them into taking the church's position. And I think the church doesn't even recognize that it's sort of done that. And the consequences of that are going to be far reaching over the next decade or two.
That is a really great observation that's illustrated right here. You're right, with the stories that we individually chose, and yet they have this bigger framework. And another common denominator is that in a lot of these articles, they say, we asked the church for comment, and there is no comment, right?
Right.
They're silent.
Exactly. We submitted questions and the church
Yeah.
says, let them eat cake.
Yes, exactly.
We
So
don't have
I
to
wonder
respond
how
to you.
long that will be a viable response, a non-response.
Yeah.
It's a good question. All right. I think we've covered it. I have one last slide, a new section that I am calling the app of the week, just because I happen to find a really cool app. So this one has been in the works for a while. Over on social media, they've been talking about, let's put this together. And it looks like it's finally launched. I think this was the first week it was available. It's called Return and Report.
So it's not a home teaching app. It's not a ministering servant app that tracks
this
your
is
ministering
the
servant.
opposite.
Okay.
Exactly. This is an app for those of us that find ourselves in LDS wards for whatever reason. And especially now that it's summer, people vacation, they visit family, and you know what you run into. Your mom goes, oh, come on, just come to church with me. So anyway, this is a way to attend a ward and to return and report on membership numbers. Again, we're always trying to figure out what exactly is going on. So last week, I think is the first time I saw this out there. It was on Ex-Mormon Reddit, and people were saying, this is great, I want to try it. So first use of it last Sunday, there were 7 reports that were submitted. It's just basically you click on it, you go in and you kind of you get to be the ward clerk for once. You get to be the one that goes like this and tries to count everybody up. So they say 7 reports were submitted yesterday, Sunday, 4 from Utah and 1 from each Texas, Idaho, and Indiana. Average attendance was 158. So dividing the church's 17 million members by 31,000 wards and the branches gives us an average ward size of 548. Dividing 548 by 158 gives us an attendance rate. And I think this is what kind of we've all sort of thought, just under 30%, like a 25 to 30 kind of percentage. So I think this will be really interesting if people do happen to attend wards and just want to kind of look around and take note and actually have some data to crunch.
That's a really interesting idea for an app. I think it's a fantastic idea because these are the numbers that the ward membership clerk counts. Every sacrament. I think it's every sacrament, counting the numbers of people. And those are the numbers that then go to Salt Lake and are never seen by anybody again because they don't want people to know what the activity rate is. I'm sorry, Bill.
Please knock before you walk in the mother's lounge to count the stragglers out in the hallway. Yeah.
You know,
there's always
the mother's lounge. The mother's lounge is the reason that girls can pass the sacrament. You know that, right? The mother's lounge is what's going to break everything wide open eventually. So, because they don't want those deacons going in there. So they have a girl standing at the door of the mother's lounge. The deacon hands the tray to the girl. The girl goes in, hands it to the mothers, and then back out. So That's the little chink in the armor right there. The girls are passing the sacrament.
Hmm.
Very interesting. I know. Anyway, I thought that's interesting. If anybody, I tried to look this up on the App Store. I did not see it there, but you can see the website there. It's returnandreport.42web.io. I think I can read that. So we'll try to put a link in it. And I will say the Newscast has a Facebook page now. So I will put the link to that there. So if anybody wants to jump over there and subscribe to the group, you can comment, you can give us ideas, you can break stories that you think we need to cover. We'll put articles that we covered during the Newscast on Monday throughout the week. And we will always post the link to the upcoming episode. And also we'll have links to past episodes. So come find us, the Mormon Newscast on Facebook, a little promo right there. So, all right. I think we've covered it. Anything else that we need to say or talk about?
No, that's all that I have. But I think you've done a fantastic job once again.
Yep.
Kudos to you for getting Salt Lake Tribune to finally bite on what is a massive story. And I just hope it will go national.
Well, I do know that one of our residents was supposed to talk to the AP, and I hope that does happen because the big picture is pretty dang interesting. That's all I can say. So
The more
we'll see.
people know about the church's playbook with their temples, the less they're going to be able to get away with what's in their playbook.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a chiasm, so it must be true.
Yeah. You did it right there. You must be true, RFM. And again, I just have to say, every time we talk about temples, please build a temple in any town that you want. Residents welcome your temple. Please build it where there's already zoning in place for it. Please perhaps work with the residents to see. And this brings up another point I was going to mention about temples and you were in Tokyo, RFM. You were there in 1980. Yeah. So I was reading a post about the Tokyo temple and how back in that day, it was sort of a matter of pride for the church to say, we worked with the people. You know, in Tokyo, for example, we built something that fit in. We got feedback. We're good neighbors. That was something that they really promoted. If you read back in those articles about the temple, and Tokyo was one that they mentioned, and you were there for that open house, which wasn't at the temple. It was somewhere else, I think you said.
Right, but I did go to the temple. And the thing about it is that I was shocked. It is downtown Tokyo, but there's like 20 feet on each side before the next building. They're not these wide open grounds and everything. It was wedged into this one spot that just barely fit the footprint of the temple.
So it fits in with what's happening there. And then the observation was made that today, for some reason, could this be a personality driven temple building kind of a thing where you have a leader that's a little more, what would you say?
Megalomaniacal is the word I think you're looking for.
Anyway, they're just temple, and it doesn't matter what it was zoned for before or anything. We're just going to put it there, and people are going to wake up and go, hey, wait, what's happening? So I don't know. I think there's a way to make everybody happy. And I think a temple could be incredible PR in any town if they would definitely work with the residents and put it somewhere where it's zoned for. So it just seems like a lost opportunity, and it's not necessary, all this litigation and everything. So anyway, we could go on for hours, as you know, about temple building, but I think it's good. Let's end by saying what does everybody have coming up? Bill, what's coming up for you? I know you've been in the middle of that giant podcast with Dan Vogel. Do you want to talk about that for a second or tell people what are coming up? Oh my goodness.
The two things
I would say is that we just released our final part 3 of the conversation between Dan Vogel responding to the things that Clark Abood has laid out. This is Clark Abood represents the polygamy deniers, those who do not think that Joseph Smith originated polygamy, but rather it was part of a coup d'etat on the part of Brigham Young to both take over the church and have polygamy and have his way with it. So part 3 released this morning. And then this Wednesday, RFM and I on Mormonism Live will have on our show Sean McCraney. And Sean has sort of rebranded himself and gone in a little bit of a different direction. And we'll sort of talk to him about that when we have him on Wednesday, 6:20 p.m. Mountain Time on Mormonism Live.
Wow. Yes, I advocate the theory of the apostolic coup d'etat. The polygamy deniers have gone one further, and now they're talking about an apostolic coup de grace.
So there it is.
Like 0 for 6 here today. I mean 6 for 0. Sorry. RFM, what about you? What's new? I know you just put out an amazing Shakespeare about one of my very favorite phrases.
What was that phrase?
Hoisted on his own petard.
Yes, and what does that mean?
Well, I didn't know. I knew that it meant that you've kind of gotten yourself in trouble, right? It's your own fault. You've done something and now you're suffering the consequences. I had no idea that it meant what you tell everybody it means on your podcast.
Oh, I want to see if you learned.
Of course I learned. Well, as RFM explained, in medieval times, in tunnels, explosives, and sometimes the person would not be able to get out before the explosive went off. And so hoist means to kind of be blown up. So
Yeah, and it's blown up with your own bomb.
yeah,
There's a
blown
little
up with
more
your own
detail
bomb.
to it, which I didn't go into the show because it is supposed to keep things simple.
Yeah.
But and I won't go into that detail here either because this isn't a Shakespeare podcast. But yeah, so I'm working on Sunday school stuff. There's all sorts of things happening in other places that I'm keeping my fingers on the pulse of, and will report on as soon as there are things worthy of being reporting, like there have been frequently in the past couple of weeks, and
Well,
will
there
still
it
be.
is. And will continue to be. That's right. And as far as my podcast, Mormonish, which drops tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, it's temples again. We have gone international, and dare I say it, we have found a similar playbook on the international scale. I don't think you're going to want to miss this one. We almost couldn't believe what we came across. It's pretty amazing. So anyway, that's 6 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to be talking about international temple building and the same controversial playbook. So
Let me ask you this question. I've heard several times the leaders of the church boast about how when they go into other countries, they go through the front door. They're talking specifically about missionary work there, I know.
yeah.
When it
No,
comes
I
to
think
temples, do you think that still holds?
in a sense, because there's a lot of connections, a lot of government connections where it allows people to go right in the front door and just kind of steamroll through the front door, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, at least in this one particular one that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, that we, and it was actually interesting because it was a presenter, someone who had written a book that was going to come on Mormonish anyway to talk about the culture and the land in this country, and then he saw a couple of our episodes on temples, and he said, I think I know something. And we're like, do you? Well, then come on, let's talk about it. So yeah, it should be really interesting. And that's tomorrow night. So all right, we've done enough shameless self-promotion. We've covered every story we can think of. We had Bill who brought everything home together and wrapped it up in a nice bow so that we sound like we know what we're doing. I think we did it. So I think it's time to say goodbye. Are we done?
Yeah.
That's it.
I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next Monday, always Monday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And please jump over to our new Facebook group page. We want to hear what you feedback on the newscast and also what kind of stories you'd like us to cover. So thanks, everybody. See you next time. Bye-bye.